just when we thought that we were safe from terrible Disney villain songs, that nothing could get any worse than King Magnifico's song from Wish, the Evil Queen song from the new live-action Snow White arrives to prove us wrong. Even though I think it's insulting to the art of musical theater itself to call this a performance, everyone is so focused on this bad performance that they think that this song's only problem is its casting, but that's simply not true. It completely fails as a musical theater song, and there are 3 songwriting and storytelling reasons why. I want to explain what they are, why I'm so uniquely disappointed as a professional musical theater performer and songwriter, find out whether or not we can fix it, and show you all that it goes deeper than just a bad song. Because it is through this song that we see that Disney just doesn't understand how to write villains anymore. And this lack of understanding is not just detrimental to the villains, it causes ripple effects throughout the entire story, and for the audience, it also ruins the core thing that legendary Disney animators who worked on the original Snow White said that every Disney film needs in order to succeed. This is Calxiyn here to make you care. Brought to you by my patrons and my YouTube members so I can show you that it is that deep, and so you can learn about musical theater and storytelling without needing to pay thousands of dollars like I did. Before we can talk about what the 3 actual problems are, though, I do want to explain why I don't think it's the performance, or even in this case, the lyrics and the composition. Even though it is shameful and honestly offensive to me as a musical theater performer that they would cast someone who, along with a laundry list of appalling behavior, cannot sing or act separately, never mind doing both at the exact same time, a skilled performer would not have saved the song. They would only be able to sell the song to us better, not factually change what we are buying. And on the topic of what we are buying, even though I do have some issues with the composition and the lyrics, it's not in the way that you may think. When the song started, I was actually pretty hopeful because of the orchestration. Even though sometimes it feels artificial compared to the organicness of theater, or almost like a parody, like when other companies try to mimic what they think a Disney villain song is, I'll take that over Pasek and Paul just reheating Dear Evan Hansen's nachos again. It's not that much of a compliment to say that this is better than Wish or Moana 2 instrumentally, but we'll take what we can get. The beginning of the song even starts with a musical theater reaction, having the tension of the strings before that lighter chime sound, and so I appreciated that. This conveys the evil queen's bubbling anger, but it's contrasted by that light bulb moment, the hope that she has an idea on how to fix things. I felt like it was unapologetically Broadway here, whereas the rest of the movie is using a pop-style sound, not because it makes any fucking sense or has an artistic purpose like it does in, say, K-pop Demon Hunters, but out of fear. In other videos, we have talked about Disney writing defensively, and the rest of this movie is doing that. It gets on its knees and begs for the attention of a cooler audience, pulling a musical equivalent of, but wait, I'm not like the other girls, come back, while alienating the people who actually like musicals. And so this song was my only hope. And that made the disappointment even worse. My positive feelings toward the composition did not last long. Because I actually liked how it started, the song made a really strong promise to me, and that can be more dangerous than, say, being instantly disappointed like I was with Magnifico. It ends up being really shallow and doesn't grow or take us anywhere from the very beginning, and it can't because the other elements are not giving it anything to work with. And this leads me into the lyrics, because you can't have compelling reactive choices in the composition if there's nothing interesting for the music to react to lyrically. My biggest problem lyrically was how at the end the song goes, "It's gonna be me that you declare, never mind, all is fair when you're the fairest of all." It's just so weird. That is not a natural continuation of what was just said. I wish they had done and then with a better singer, we could have really gone for it on some big belty note to change up what we already heard and give us some definitive closure. Other than that, it's not really about what is here, it's more what's not here. Let me know what you guys think and if you would like to see a video about this, but I've been investigating whether Disney songs have gotten more stupid. Like, not in a throw caution to every warning sign type stupid, but a they do not think that we are smarter than a 5th grader, that the actual language in the songs is being limited to what a 7-year-old could understand. Think about our past villains compared to this. Meticulous planning, tenacity spanning, or why invite their calumny and consternation. It's not big words equal better song, but all the characters sound the same. They have the same vocabulary, and it is a very modern vocabulary too. But even all of those things wouldn't necessarily be catastrophic weaknesses, and yet, I still think the song fails. Unfortunately, not everything is as straightforward as it is with Wish. Even though Wish definitely has story problems that I've tried to use my other videos to bring more attention to beyond the wonky lyrics, I think that the reason why Wish content totally exploded was because the technical issues were so obvious. People wanted answers on how fuck-ups of this scale could even be passable at a big company like Disney. But the Snow White songs are a bit sneakier. All Is Fair doesn't have the same egregious problems like Wish. There are no major instances of words being used incorrectly or crimes against grammar, meter, rhyme, and everything else I would usually put under the technical craft umbrella. And so instead of being able to definitively hear when something's off, we're left with this nagging feeling that something is wrong without knowing what it is. And the answer to that cannot be found in chalking up the problems to performance, composition, or lyrics. It's not about what is here, it's about what's not here, and what's missing under the storytelling craft umbrella. And so if you are a seasoned Cal Pal wondering why I'm changing up what we usually do, just like for Princess Problems, we can't do a full composition and lyric analysis for this song, because that is not the problem. The reason I talk so much about fundamentals is because songs are a mode of delivery for meaning, and if the vessel is shoddy, even the most sincere, heartfelt messages can't reach us. However, if the vessel is made of shit, and the cargo the vessel is carrying is just boxes upon boxes of more shit, what would be the point of me spending 30 minutes talking about how we need to build a better boat? Build a better boat to deliver the shit? That's lunacy! But All Is Fair reaches new levels of disappointment. With Princess Problems, the vessel was questionable, but it was the least of our problems compared to the aforementioned boxes upon boxes of shit, that being the narrative and emotional content of the song. I knew from the jump that this song was going to be insincere and insufferable, especially because of how the title holds the thesis of the song. With Magnifico, the vessel was made of shit, and so was everything else inside it, so none of us could be deceived into hopping on board. We knew it was not going to be enjoyable or successful in terms of executing its narrative functions and its objectives in the way that a musical theater song needs to in order to support the story. But with All Is Fair, we were promised the ocean. We were presented with a nice enough vessel with a strong thesis that gave us confidence that it would make it to shore. But instead of being taken on a journey, instead of getting the progress and payoff that we were promised, instead of the characters being transformed or at the bare minimum, the song being a revealing force in the narrative, we are sitting stagnant in the Evil Queen's dirty bathwater. In a musical, the song is fun is not enough. Everything must be in service of character and story. And I'm not saying that you can't like it or find it fun, but you finding another purpose for it or it filling a need for your own personal enjoyment does not change that it fails as a musical theater song in this show. And one more thing about how this song is in the show, by the way. They cut this entire section. I thought that I was going crazy and my footage was messed up, but no, after Because Well I Can, there is a dialogue portion, and then we begin again at Perhaps I've Been a Bit Confusing. So not only do we lose the slow build-up, we also lose the entire explanation about the Queen's philosophy and what she values. I literally could not believe it. I am just flabbergasted. If I have to say, no wait, the song is good if you completely take it out of the context of the movie and listen to a cover artist on YouTube and watch an animatic with a Genshin Impact character where the artists have crafted a narrative around the song that actually makes sense, so you don't need to think too hard about the story that Disney was actually trying to tell. That's stupid. There is a semblance of a promise here, but the progress and payoff only work if we go in and create a whole new story ourselves to fit the lyrics. And I don't know about you guys, but at least for me, when my brain registers that, it's all over, because now we have just circled back to this is an awful song for this musical, and all the wasted potential and everything that we could have had. Because listening to the song again, knowing that the promise that it makes will never pay off, knowing that the clever, gripping thesis of all is fair when you're the fairest of all, and that sort of twisty lyric that I'm a sucker for and love so much will be wasted, becomes an exercise in insanity. It's all empty calories. You're never gonna get that satisfaction because every time you play it, you will sit there thinking, okay, and why do I care? Expecting that promise and payoff and nothing is going to happen. If you know that you are just gonna end up musically blue-balled, why put yourself in that situation again in the first place when you can just listen to a better Disney song? So all of that being said, in that case, what storytelling mistakes does this song make? Let's talk about the first major problem out of the three. If you didn't know this fun fact and I taught you something new, now's your time to subscribe. But for The Lion King, Be Prepared almost made a fatal mistake when it was thanks to me, because they had it set after Scar had killed Mufasa. And the reason why I think that this is such a cool example for us is because we can rule out technical craft problems with the lyrics or composition, because they are basically identical. This really well-crafted, catchy song that we all love and enjoy could have failed simply because of the context around its placement. Because of this placement, there were no stakes, no suspense, no question if Scar will succeed or how he's gonna pull it off. The climactic moment of evil has already passed us by, it's just Scar jerking himself off about how clever he is. Contrast this with Be Prepared, where the stakes in our relationship with Scar as a character changes dramatically. Think about the sense of progress as Scar answers the questions that the thesis made us ask. What do we need to be prepared for? Why is Scar preparing for this now? What does Scar hope to gain by doing this? And Scar not only successfully convinces the hyenas, achieving his goal in this scene, but the stakes are also permanently altered because they aren't just talking about killing Mufasa anymore. The decision has been made, and we are going to sit there helpless and horrified as it unfolds. What Scar, Ursula, Facilier, and non-Disney villains like Preminger all have in common is that they are about to take what they've always wanted. Meticulous planning, sometimes over 10 long years of it, has brought them to this make-or-break moment. For those that don't know the answer or have not seen the new live-action Snow White, we're gonna play a little game. Where do you think that All Is Fair takes place? Is it A, in the evil Queen Mirror Chamber after she finds out she is no longer the fairest of them all because Snow White snuck out of the palace a la Quasimodo post waiting on a wish and hands out food to the people? Snow White then becoming the fairest of them all because she has won over the common folk with her kindness and generosity. Is it B, in the palace after Snow White giving Jonathan food is caught in 4K by the magic mirror, and she is deemed fairest of them all? The evil queen would have Jonathan arrested and direct this song to him and Snow White in this scene where Snow White suggests mercy and kindness. He would be the coward sung about in the opening lyric. Or is it C, when the evil queen convinces the huntsman to kill Snow White? If you answered A, B, or C, you are fucking wrong, because those options would apparently make way too much sense for Disney. Those were actually theories I had based on the title and the trailers before the song came out. Even though I prefer to keep my criticism and ideas in the realm of strengthening the storyteller's vision versus changes that will suit my taste, I do think that these fall into that, and I'm going to explain why. And the reason why I think talking about these theories is important is because in musical theater, the title is the thesis of the song, and you are making a promise to the audience that whatever the title of the song is will be explored and paid off. You're not only giving the audience what they wanted, but things that they didn't even know that they needed yet. And so I think that there's value in considering that audience instinct and why we have it, and what makes that instinct stronger compared to what we ended up getting. For Route A, I thought the evil queen finding out that Snow White was the fairest of them all would spur the song. I was thinking this would be an other self crash out, similar to what How Can I Refuse turns into, where it would end with the evil queen deciding she is going to kill Snow White. But the huntsman wouldn't be here, it would be to her inner self and the magic mirror. We would find out a backstory like, I will not become the peasant who was forced to work in the mines again. This peasant's son won't turn and run because some reckless royal chose another beau. Or something, and hear about how she used her wits, cunning, feminine wiles, magic, whatever, to hypnotize Snow White's father into marrying her in the first place. Basically, the life I worked so hard for is under attack. Here's the life I had before, here's what I did to make my life better, and then we have the turning point. Is she going to kill Snow White? Is she not going to? And that decision that we can't come back from, that deplorable choice that she is going to kill her own stepdaughter, and that is how she will maintain her happiness. My Route B was based on the trailer with Jonathan getting arrested. I thought these lyrics would be about Jonathan, and that now she's calling him a coward because he stole this food from the palace, he was a traitor to the queen, and he's hiding behind Snow White. She's defending him, he's not facing it like a man, right? And then the rest of the song would be lecturing Snow White like, this is the way the world works, how dare you challenge me in public. It would have this fake motherly undertone. Do I dare say a sort of world according to Chris / Candy Store moment, but less teenage girl and more like Frollo's part of out there. This is my conspiracy theory, and I want to know what you guys think. I think that this song was supposed to be here. Everything points to it having been here in terms of the actual scene, but I think somewhere in production, with all the rewrites they did or whatever, they changed it. And that would make the lyrics like telling me to play nice, ambitious girls must be vicious girls make a lot more sense. Like that in particular striked me as older woman giving younger girl advice. Like she's saying, Snow White, you have to be vicious. Because these lyrics don't make sense with the dialogue in the scene that we actually got at all. My thought process for Route C was that this would be a Convincing the Minions song. She is calling the huntsman a coward because he initially refuses to kill Snow White. And this would have elements of Theory 1, the I was a peasant, I won't return to the mines and all that, but that would be like a bridge that she has to herself. The rest of it would be convincing the huntsman. And maybe we can even have some fake solidarity, like she's like, we both came up together, why do you care about the royal brat? I'm one of you. And we could also see how the peasants are suffering if she offers something that he can't refuse. Maybe his elderly father can't work anymore and he can't pay his taxes. Maybe his wife is pregnant and needs medicine. Whatever you want in order to hammer in the themes that the movie was trying but failed to execute re Good Things Grow and that thesis as the opening number, which that needs a video all by itself, but let's keep going. I also thought that in general, there was going to be a huge twist with the evil queen and the mines, because if you didn't know, they changed it so the dwarfs are magical and that they can sense where the jewels are, which is really, really weird, but we don't have time to unpack all that today. And so I was wondering, what if it wasn't just them? What if it's any human with magical potential? And if this were the case, it only seems natural that we'd end up in a situation where magical peasants would be highly encouraged, aka forced, to work in the mines to find these jewels. So I thought the twist was going to be that the evil queen realized that she was being used as a tool for these non-magic people. People with magic are so powerful that the kingdoms are relying on and exploiting them. They should be bowing to her. She shouldn't bow to this lowly human. And I also thought that her obsession with jewels would be because the jewels have magic in them and she sucks the power out of them or whatever, and this could all be a metaphor for hoarding the wealth and all of that stuff, both literally but also the magical wealth and power that she has. And she would have used magic to make Snow White's father fall in love with her before killing him. Because right now, I shit you not, his wife dies, and he just falls in love with the evil queen because she's hot, and this fucks up everything that Snow White has going on because she idolizes him as this good and virtuous man, and this good and virtuous man couldn't keep it in his pants dance for a couple months after his true love died. Like, it is just insanity. Anyway, what all these theories have in common is Snow White being called the fairest of them all by the magic mirror before the song happens, because this is clearly the perfect inciting incident for the evil queen to spiral. Particularly with Route B, it could be the evil queen trying to undo that title from Snow White before ultimately deciding to kill her. She is trying to make Snow White evil like her, and then when that fails, that's when she calls in the huntsman. But the other two, where she is making the decision to murder, are the strongest placements possible in terms of maximum villainy. But here's what actually happens. This song happens after the queen has sent the huntsman to kill Snow White, and she finds out that he tricked her. She starts by singing to herself, and then, after a horrendous cut in the editing, confronts him in her royal court. The evil queen finds out the huntsman disobeyed her is objectively the weakest placement for this song compared to the evil queen finds out that Snow White is the fairest of them all and orders her assassination. The evil queen let Snow White live all these years. Clearly, she was not very threatened by her before this point. It is only when Snow White disrupts the status quo that everything changes forever. But instead of putting this song at the pinnacle of the evil queen's evil, this turning point where she makes this decision that horrifies us, that there is no coming back from, and the songwriters being allowed to show how twisted and sinister she is, they put it here? Instead of writing the song where the evil queen's worldview is shattered, haha, forever, when the magic mirror doesn't give her the answer that he has given her every single day for years and years, someone told the songwriters to write a song about a minor inconvenience! That is what the huntsman disobeying her is portrayed as here! Look at how evil I am, and I'm not going to change. Only works if it's a mask-off moment, like we don't know the character that well up until now. Or if there's a more sinister evolution, like think about Gaston going from this egotistical, sexist pest to orchestrating a just barely within the law kidnapping to blackmail Belle into marrying him. Even though Gaston is more I am, it at least ends with, and I am more evil and more sinister than you thought I was. You, the audience, underestimated me. If the evil queen so far had been sweet and pleasant in public but nasty in private to Snow White, and now she say beheaded this guy in front of everyone without concern for her image, maybe this placement would work, because even if not for the audience, it would be mask off to somebody. But if you are not going to put the song at the most intense moment of evil of deciding to kill a child, your next emotional moment better be just as good, and this is not. But it's not just that this is the weakest itinerary for this ship, it's also about the crew members that the ship has on it. And this leads me into our second problem. The placement and how that contributes to a lack of compelling inciting incident is not our only issue, it's also our scene partner. Another reason for my theories earlier is because even though in musical theater there are many more types of songs, Disney villains typically have one of three: making a deal with the hero, let's plan the evil, and also a combat/confrontation song. Even Gaston and Frollo to some extent end with let's plan the evil, even though they start out differently. And the reason why this is important for our analysis is because the scene partner completely alters what expositional and emotional information the audience will be able to receive, because the villain has to tailor their language to the people around them. If the evil queen was alone in her mirror chamber, we could get that juicy, honest information about her, similar to, say, what How Can I Refuse provides, like who Preminger truly is, what he wants, why he wants it, what he has been doing to get it, why the final checkmate move has to happen now, his dream versus his nightmare scenario, and how he plans to overcome what is in his way when mid-song, his minions tell him that his perfect plan is about to be foiled. If we had gotten a villain and hero duet where the evil queen tries to convince Snow White to be more like her and vice versa, Snow White tries to encourage kindness in the queen, we would get a different type of reveal that can only come from the hero and the villain being locked in conflict with each other. They both want something from each other, and we can see the strengths and weaknesses that the hero and villain have in terms of making that happen and being convincing. In theater school, we were taught that every scene or song is an argument, and not to confuse a character being sweet and polite with a character being passive. They are fighting for what they want, it's just in a less sinister way compared to the villains. The way that Poor Unfortunate Souls works, for example, is by offering something different than Preminger, but just as juicy. The conflict between the hero and the villain, and that when this scene is over, everything will change forever, and I would suggest these videos for more about that. But we also see how this reveals more about Ariel and Ursula and us. For Ariel, this is her coming-of-age moment. In fairy tales, it's usually a forest or a magic mirror being the liminal space for this coming-of-age moment, but I guess it is called Ursula's undersea garden, and so it's still fitting. Is she willing to commit to this life-changing decision and make this sacrifice for the sake of her dreams? There's a big difference between her idea, which was swimming up to Eric's palace and just saying hello, versus leaving everything she has ever known behind. Is her dream that important to her, and what does that say about her and her values and her convictions? And it's interesting because with Ariel, we get something more truthful about her, more honest. But with Ursula, we've already seen her alone multiple times before now. So what we're getting as the audience is a dishonesty. Like, we get to see her perform this character, the savior who will soothe, cajole, and present herself as the solution to all your problems. And we get to see how skilled she is as a villain. And in terms of revealing something about us, they were very careful with not wanting the audience to think that Ariel is stupid. There is suspense because we know Ursula is evil, and obviously we fear for Ariel. We know that this is not a person that she can trust. But they wanted us to reflect and consider, if you were in Ariel's situation, can you truly say that you'd be immune to this scheme? When we realized that we would fall into the same trap, that we are the underdogs just like Ariel, we want to see her succeed even more, because if she can win, it means that we can win. She's not this perfect superhero like we talk about in this video. She is fallible, but can she persevere even though Ursula is plotting for her downfall? But let's bring it back to Snow White. Because they put it in so late, the other inciting incidents become unavailable. But does that mean it's impossible for the huntsman to work? No! The problem is they don't even try. If you thought this would be a song convincing the huntsman to do shit right this time, to repent, to follow her, to grovel for his disobedience, you'd be wrong again! She just sings about how fun it is to be evil and how it's her divine right with these generic lyrics. In this scene, the huntsman is a horrible scene partner. He offers no opinion throughout the entire song, and unless you watch the movie, you'd have no idea that he was even here or what he said to the evil queen. And you guys would know if you listen to other Disney songs that they always include the dialogue for the audience's sake if it's really important. But even if they had, she doesn't react to what he says at all in the lyrics! He asks for mercy, not for himself, but for Snow White, and the evil queen just goes on as if he didn't just fucking say that! She doesn't care that the huntsman is so selfless that he would face any horrible punishment for the princess that he had a 2-minute conversation with over her, when again he has been doing her dirty work for years at this point. This should have made her seething with fucking rage, and if this all wasn't bad enough, the song completely undermines itself because she just asked the captain of the guard to do it anyway! In something better, it would theoretically be okay to pivot from the huntsman to the captain of the guard and make this song a "is anyone else going to rebel? Because remember what your place is" type moment if she realizes that she really can't crack the huntsman, right? Your character can start losing and pivot to something else, but the huntsman would need to face a severe punishment. All she says is that she's gonna throw him down in the dungeon? Esmeralda was almost burned at the stake! When people committed treason, they used to get fucking executed, and you're just gonna toss this man in the dungeon to be rescued at a later date? No! Behead this motherfucker and shit, or get off the pot, because you are not villain material unless you're willing to kill somebody! That is barely diminish him, then finish him. She doesn't even hang him upside down outside and leave him for the vultures and the rats or anything evil like that. The dungeon? That's the best you can do? And asking the captain of the guard is so characters can't be stupid. However, their arrogance needs to blind them to their own stupidity. They have to have reasonable confidence that this won't backfire. And she could have done that if she used magic on him or hypnotized him or something, but none of that happens. The whole point of the huntsman was for the sake of discretion. If I was plotting more evil, he is the last fucking person that I consider asking. Like, that's a perfect recipe for a coup versus just finding another desperate person with no legitimate power to replace the huntsman. Why are you picking one of the people who has actual power? Personally, I would have written it to be Jonathan and make sure that it was much, much earlier compared to when we would see princess problems. Because unlike the first time the queen caught Jonathan, there is no Snow White to save him anymore. And even ignoring the fact that they will fall in love, recruiting Jonathan to kill Snow White is the ultimate display of control and revenge. It does not matter how kind you are to people, the world is cruel and heartless, and the people you helped will stab you in the back. And her being in love with him would just be icing on the cake. But no, it was just that easy for the evil queen to get what she wanted. Because she doesn't need to convince the huntsman, she can ask someone else. And because of that, there is no conflict. No stakes, no struggle, no story. And no reason for us to care. And both the placement and the scene partner contribute to our third problem, which is subject matter. There is a fundamental misunderstanding of the story and what this song should be about here. The movie seems to think that killing Snow White is the evil queen's super objective or need, when that is a goal. Snow White is an obstacle that prevents the evil queen from getting what she really wants. And in that sense, for this moment, the huntsman is actually a more immediate problem compared to Snow White. The huntsman is a representation of an idea that should have played into the themes of the story, that again, they tried and failed to plant in the opening number. They want to have this common folk rising up against the oppression story, and this good things grow when you are insert moral value here compared to the evil queen being vain and heartless, but they don't do anything with any of that. And because of that, they can't go deeper with the huntsman. Sometimes, good things are not the only things that grow. You can have weeds, thorns even, and those thorns have been wrapping around and punishing the people if they step out of line for even a second. The huntsman is the seed that she planted 10 years ago, the secret tool that will always be there to help us later, but he's disobeying her. He has done all her dirty work in the shadows since the very beginning, and she brought him up from nothing and gave him everything, so how dare he betray her now? Despite all the jewels or status or luxury that she offers him, and all the ways she tells him that he'll be punished, they cannot be controlled anymore. Losing the power over the huntsman, who is your most loyal subject, represents how you are losing the power over all the people. You cannot get rid of what Snow White is growing and cultivating amongst them through her kindness. And if we again go with my idea that the queen was a peasant who clawed her way to the top, there is betrayal now on another level because it becomes us versus them. The princess is deceiving you and you're all falling for it. The only one who knows what is best for this kingdom is me, because I was one of you. In any case, that is the more exciting, inciting incident here. So to make this placement and this scene partner work, you have to make the huntsman important enough to justify the evil queen singing an entire song. But the evil queen was not written to know what the huntsman tricking her should actually mean to her. And so nothing is revealed about anyone because no one is pushed or challenged in any way. Instead of doing a kick line about how fun it is to be evil, we could see her desperate because she is watching as the power is slipping through her grasp and Snow White isn't even here. All we get is a song where she's singing about how much fun being evil is, but Disney villains don't do that. The entertainment value and the fun is a byproduct of them relishing in and embracing their evil. All songs and scenes are arguments. I love being evil, tee-hee, is not an argument. And though this movie has a million more failures that we could talk about, that's the ultimate failure of this song. Even though I defended Pasek and Paul at the beginning, is it really someone else's fault that they didn't explore this in a meaningful way? I mean, for all we know, and we've talked about on this channel, maybe it legitimately is. But there is still a route here where the worst possible choices for placement and scene partner could have still resulted in something compelling. Maybe they were just doing what they were told, but there's nothing here that indicates that they actually grasp what the huntsman's disobedience actually represents. A song cannot start and end in the same place. There has to be a revelation, a transformation, a decision, at least something changing emotionally with the character, but this has nothing. I said earlier that the audience better get what they were promised and something they didn't even know they wanted in order to be satisfied. And I think this is also why, even though I say that fairy tales should be retold, that deviating from the script can be dangerous. Because you're promising us, oh, we've given the evil queen a song. She never had that before. You're presenting it as if it was needed and necessary, an enhancement of the original. Really, I feel like that's what all the remakes try to present themselves to be. And so if you fail that, you are in big trouble. Is this treatment for the evil queen really better than the original? And if she's not, that doesn't just sabotage the villain. Musical numbers make us care about the villain and also the hero. The hero we are endeared to is now in danger because of this worthy adversary that is worth our energy to hate and fear. But what happens when we are not intimidated and this evil queen is not worth hating? When she is not an adversary, but a clown. And this leads me into the core thing that every Disney movie needs in order to succeed. But before I reveal that, thank you for caring. If you want to tell YouTube that this video is good enough to reach a wider audience, you can support me by sharing, commenting, clipping funny things if you want, and posting them on Twitter so I can reach more people who care as much as we do. But even just objectively, in terms of the data I have access to, if you've gotten this far, you must be pretty special already. Or you've just left me on while you're doing the dishes or something and you forgot about me. And thank you again to my patrons and my YouTube members for their monetary support. They get early access and a bunch of other cool rewards like exclusive looks at the Musical Theater VTuber project. These are some examples of the posts they got early and then also the posts that they have exclusive access to right now. And thank you again to everyone who has gotten some merch so far. This is gonna sound silly, but I still can't believe that there are things that represent me in people's houses. People are wearing my clothes and have my stuff on their fridge. It's just crazy. I'm just so grateful because ironically, I never thought that anyone would care that much. Supporting me directly is still the best way that I will see all of your money as opposed to only a percentage of it, because with the merch there's production and shipping and all of that stuff. But if you need a cute hoodie, because it is getting colder, not in here because of the studio lights, but where you live it might be getting colder, or a notebook to write all your stories in, I'm gonna get myself a notebook to put by my bed for all the songwriting thoughts that I have at 3 in the morning so I don't use my phone and expose myself to the blue light. But anyway, if you need something like that, I hope you'll check it out, but let's get back to the video. This song not only commits these musical theater sins, but it also goes against everything in Disney's own villain Bible. Fun fact, in the animated version, the evil queen was going to originally get a Gilbert and Sullivan style musical number in the scene where she orders the huntsman to kill Snow White. She was going to have a lot more of a comedic personality, the fat, batty, cartoon type, self-satisfied. But Walt Disney decided that this was not right for the story, and she underwent revisions to be stately, beautiful in the way of a Benda mask, a cool, serene character who demonstrates her fury only in moments of great passion. And the Disney Villain Bible talks about how the evil queen, as a result, was Walt Disney's most frightening villain. Walt actually got criticism from parent groups because of the intensity of the character, and even though the book says he never admitted if it got to him or not, the animators who wrote the book say that in the future, he held back from making villains to her same level, despite the fact the animators wanted to take the villains even further. Walt never made a villain this scary, real, or menacing again. The audiences believed and gasped at what was clearly attempted murder and felt the terror Snow White felt. She is intense in her anger and has evil thoughts with no redeeming qualities, with her victim so childlike in her belief that she is safe. They knew that in terms of fulfilling those objectives, making the evil queen comedic was dangerous, that she needed to be played seriously. And with all of this information at their disposal and more that the public does not have access to, they decided that they knew better than Walt Disney. The evil queen in this movie is a joke. They are afraid to make her sincerely evil, and I do have a video that goes deeper into the villain-victim dynamic and also why Disney may be afraid of this, but whatever the reason, it shows that they don't know what a villain is supposed to do. The Bible says that our fascination with villains is because they express something that we wish we could, that we are not allowed to. Not that we want to be bad people or do bad things, but rather that these are feelings that we all have to bottle up. We have all felt underappreciated, that we deserve something more, something that has maybe even unfairly been given to someone else. We have felt jealousy, rejection, or a sense of otherness. And the villains react to these perceived injustices with an honesty that is not appropriate for our polite society. They horrify us with their actions, but they also fascinate us, because unlike, a psycho killer in a horror movie who is just evil because they were born that way or they love killing or whatever, there is a vulnerability here in equal measure to the hero. What makes our Disney villains so menacing is their feelings of victimhood. In some of my other videos, we've talked about the idea of competence, initiative, and likability. And even though villains do not have to be all three in the same way that protagonists are not always all three either, Disney villains do need to have the fourth element, which in this case, instead of objective unfairness, is a perceived unfairness. Even though the victim will go through hardship that appeals to our basic sense of unfairness, the Disney Villain Bible says that every villain must feel as though they are the victim of an unjust circumstance or society, that they have been wronged, that they should have been the one who gets the power or the woman or the respect, and that this is an injustice that must be corrected. They feel like the underdogs in their own story. It is the unfairness that the villain feels, no matter how unfounded, that motivates them to create high stakes and become a menace for the hero. They are trying to rightfully take back what the hero has stolen from them. And this is why they interfere with the destinies of others. Because even if the villain and the hero could both win, that's not okay. The hero does not deserve it, so what kind of world would we be living in if they also get a reward? They deserve to be punished for trying to disrupt the villain's happy ending. Even Frollo and Mother Gothel, who we see at points of victory, believe themselves to be victims of a new injustice. They are losing what they worked for and deserve. The status quo is being disrupted, and they must fight for things to return how they once were. Unfairness drives desire and desperation, and shows us the lengths the villains will go in order to succeed. But it's just too easy for the evil queen to get what she wants. And so in regards to the new live-action material, she never goes to such lengths. She does the apple thing because it was in the original, but in terms of the new stuff that they've written in, she is never desperate enough to take her villainy to new extremes. And I think her lack of desperation stems from two things. One, the amount of legitimate power that they gave her, and two, the original story beats that they carried over being poorly integrated together or just straight up incompatible with the new character choices they made. There are 5 bases of power that leaders use to maintain control: legitimate, reverent, expert, coercion, and reward. For example, Gaston is not the mayor. He has no legitimate power in town. But he has reverent power, he is liked, he is respected by people, and he also has expert power as a hunter. It gives credibility that the beast is dangerous and needs to be hunted and killed. He also has coercion sometimes, like if you're not with us, you're against us, but usually the punishment for not agreeing with him is more implied than outright stated. And it's easy to miss, but he also offers a reward in the mob song, saying that the men can take whatever they find at the castle. And you may be thinking to yourself, why did Gaston do that? They are already all the way here. Clearly the men are convinced, but you can see that they're pretty freaked the fuck out. So this is his way of continuing to maintain control. He's sweetening the deal. Hey, don't run away, all right, at this big scary castle and whatever we're gonna find inside, because you will get a reward. You can take whatever you want from here. But this is important. 99% of the Disney villains have no legitimate power. And in the rare cases where they do, this is to help leverage action. It is not absolute power in terms of the conflict, particularly the internal conflict the villain is going through. Even when Frollo has legitimate power as a judge, it cannot absolve him of his sins, and so he cannot use it to circumvent his internal conflict. Not when he still has to answer to a higher power, which is God. In a similar way, Lady Tremaine is the matriarch, but ultimately she has to answer to the prince. The problem becomes when that legitimate power circumvents the sense of conflict. And in another type of story, like the reason why the past Disney villains, I think, avoid this would be a problem of all this legitimate power, because then it feels like the hero has no chance of being able to win. You can't argue with the divine right of kings. But the reason why the evil queen in the animated Snow White works so well, even though she is queen, is because she has to answer to the higher power of the magic mirror, and she also doesn't really have a lot of resources at her disposal. Presumably, she only has the huntsman because he operates in secret, as opposed to publicly using the captain of the guard. When the huntsman fails, the evil queen becomes more desperate, and that desperation lets us feel that she is a threat because it's the evil queen against Snow White. But what makes this so bad is that they pick Snow White, who also has legitimate power. It's not just reward or reverent her kindness. She is not in danger because she also has divine right to rule. They cancel each other out, and so what is the evil queen left with? Yes, because they're following the original, she does eventually have the benefit of using the poisoned apple. But because she doesn't do any magic beforehand, there is no victim, and so there is no villainy. Imagine how different things would be if she hypnotized the captain of the guard and everything that I said before, because it's not just a matter of power, but control. The villain wants to control the destinies of others, but also their own destiny. That's usually why they're going out here doing things themselves. They're leading the charge. But she doesn't use coercion or reward or expert, in this case, magic. And so everything hinges on whether or not the captain of the guard would like to do a coup this week. And so what this song turns into is the evil queen stupidly singing about how powerful she is when we know full well that she is not a threat. Because the one card that she constantly plays has already been countered by Snow White. The one thing that legitimate power should have no bearing on is the magic mirror factually calling her the fairest of them all. But remember how earlier I mentioned that Frollo has to answer to God? The evil queen in this version of the movie would be like if Frollo was not afraid of God. And because of this, she can never be vulnerable with us. The evil queen basically has two incompatible personalities now. The plot beats are driven by her characterization from the animated version. But the live-action evil queen has a completely different characterization that doesn't suit those choices. She has different wants, desires, needs, and they didn't successfully fuse the two things together. Think about it this way. The animated evil queen says, "Nothing else matters, I want to be the fairest of them all." But the live-action evil queen says, "I am the fairest of them all, and this is proven by my life being fair. I have everything that the fairest of them all should have," disregarding the purpose of the magic mirror entirely. She does not sing, "It's gonna be me that you declare to the mirror," but to the people. And this could have been easily fixed by adding a bridge where she expresses that no one should be above her, not even the magic mirror. And so in order for the mirror to give her the answer that she wants, she has to kill Snow White. Or she has to find some other way to be above the mirror entirely, maybe with her magic. And for modern Disney, this might be a little crazy, but since we're already changing so much anyway, if they really wanted to, they could have said that Snow White's heart is an ingredient for something, and that through that ingredient, the evil queen will somehow supersede the magic mirror. Like, kind of think about how Jafar becomes an all-powerful sorcerer. Maybe it's the heart from the fairest of all that will give you unlimited power or immortality or something. We could have thrown a little bit of Mother Gothel in there, but anyway, this song isn't about any of that. In the animated movie, Snow White is not only unaware of how the evil queen feels about her, but according to the Bible, her own beauty in the first place. And I hesitate to say sexuality in regards to the Disney version, but the original is 100% like that. Like, that's what her beef is. It's similar to Little Red Riding Hood going into the woods and becoming a woman, right? The danger from the wolf being allegorical to male attention, virginity, all of that fun stuff that Little Red Riding Hood is unaware of and knows by the end of her journey. And in that, there is another problem. The original fairy tale was about Snow White becoming a threat to the evil queen as a woman. And even though in the Disney version they never got to execute that to the fullest that they wanted to, like for example, they were going to have the evil queen kidnap the prince and lock him up in the dungeon, but he was too hard to animate, the undertones of that original theme are still there in just the nature of adapting the story. They lifted that subtext even though it doesn't go that much further. But what this movie seems to be going for is that Snow White is the fairest of them all because she is kind, which the original played into, but that wasn't treated as the mirror's factual definition. And so if that is the case, killing Snow White should mean that the title just goes to the next kind person around. And the evil queen should have never been called fairest of them all in the first place. And on top of that, the evil queen says that her beauty makes kingdoms hand over their keys anyway. So again, there is nothing in this song that expresses that she feels like Snow White is a threat to her as a woman. Maybe they could have done something like Mother Gothel, where the evil queen made a deal with the magic mirror and her beauty is starting to fade the longer and longer Snow White is deemed fairest of them all. That would explain why the magic mirror deemed her as fairest. It could be a little genie, sort of monkey's paw type of trick, that she's been the fairest all this time, right? He's gotten her comfortable, lulled her into a false sense of security, and now he's like slowly taking it away. It's the ultimate punishment for her to get everything that she wants and then see it be taken from her because of her wickedness. But the magic mirror is completely irrelevant with these new themes in the overthrow the tyrant treatment. If the magic mirror was important, she'd be crashing out about it. But she's not. She's singing about how great everything is, and it's not an act. She truly believes this. She is not seething about the magic mirror calling Snow White the fairest of them all during this song. And on top of that, the mirror has already called Snow White fair twice now, and nothing has changed. In the animated version, enough had changed in the queen's internal world, if you want to call it that. But there are no consequences in terms of what the live-action evil queen actually wants. The glitz, the glamour, the jewels, the beauty, the position, it's still all hers. She hasn't lost anything. She never expresses any fear that it is at risk of being lost, and we've seen that she hasn't lost. Half of what she sings about in this song are physical objects that have not been taken away in the time that she's been demoted. So why is this important? The live-action evil queen cares more about being queen compared to being fairest of them all, which means the magic mirror cannot put anything in jeopardy. It would be put into jeopardy if the evil queen realized that she's losing hold over her subjects, like I suggested earlier, but as we've talked about already, that didn't happen either. So if the themes of Snow White are not in the story, what makes it a Snow White story as opposed to just a generic fairy tale story? And the villain not being enough of a threat also hurts our endearment towards the hero. Even though Rachel's singing and acting is a million times better than Gal Gadot's, Rachel also lacks that childlike naivete that they talk about in the Bible. All of that to say, in the live-action version, this evil queen is doing evil on the daily right in front of Snow White's eyes. And because waiting on a wish does not answer the question of why now, the audience is alienated in a similar way that they were afraid of with Ariel being seen as stupid for listening to Ursula. In this case, it lessens Snow White's competence and initiative as a protagonist for a version where they wanted to make her more proactive. The movie never answers the question of why didn't Snow White try to rebel before, because Waiting on a Wish ends and she's still not rebelling at all. It's an Ouroboros in that sense. The queen is never really pushed to desperation, her feelings of unfairness are never clear, and so she never feels as evil as we need her to be. So Snow White can't be as heroic as we need Snow White to be. So the queen never feels threatened outside of that one time, and she can't get more desperate and more evil. I have said before that I believe fairy tales are meant to be retold, and I actually liked the new ideas of Snow White joining up with the common folk to overthrow the evil queen and things like that. In a different retelling, you can make the evil queen entitled, vain, erratic, and batty for a commentary about people in power. But that's not an excuse to have no depth. And that's not Walt Disney's evil queen. It doesn't excuse you from the responsibility you have as a writer to make them feel like a real threat. Snow White's problem as a whole is wanting to have its cake and eat it too. It will not commit to a radically different retelling because they want the branding and the marketing and to sell toys, and yet they still want to modernize it and make these changes. And so everybody loses, because the changes not only undermine the entire story, but they sabotage the one thing that every Disney film needs in order to succeed, which is the balance of warmth and darkness. Warmth and darkness in personality, in relationships, and in story construction. They say that every film that has continued to be successful has been carefully built around the potential for warmth and the basic concept. And the reason I say warmth and darkness is because we can't have the hero's light, their warmth, these things that make us care about the hero without the villain's darkness. The villain and victim are built from each other, making each character richer and stronger. The victims are forced into emotionally charged activities while the viewers vicariously live through each disheartening torment, each moment of terror, each threatening thought. The plot is constructed so the victim is dangerously vulnerable and almost loses the struggle against a stronger adversary. They say if there is no victim, there is no villainy, but that also means if there is no villainy, there is no victim. That's why the villain is the key to the movie, and everyone else must rise to that same level. There must be a worthy adversary or you have no picture. It is what the villain forces others in the cast to do that will make a story memorable rather than merely ordinary. And the most memorable parts of any Disney movie are the musical numbers. The dialogue or the visuals may move us just as much in the moment, but music creates a warmth that we can take with us wherever we go versus needing to throw the entire movie on. It is how we keep the characters in the stories in our hearts. In a musical, the characters pour their hearts and souls out to you. But Disney has seemed to have forgotten that it's not just the heroes that need to do that, but the villains too. We've talked about how the remakes and even the new animated films as a whole are plagued with insincerity in many tiny ways. Think meta jokes about the princess franchise or characters rolling their eyes when other characters sing. But those moments, even though they can snowball into bigger issues, are usually self-contained. They are annoying for that moment, but they won't ruin a greater warm moment yet to come. But in this case, by turning the evil queen into a joke, they refuse to engage with the whole story sincerely. That vulnerability and that honesty is the only way we get to see the depths of their darkness and depravity. But instead, what we got here is like a parody of what a YouTuber would think a villain song is in the 2010s. Walt Disney ironically made her more real when she was animated than real people could in live action. But if you can believe it, this is really just the tip of the iceberg with the problems that this movie has. And so if you're just as fascinated as I am and don't want our time together to end just yet, check out either of these videos on Waiting on a Wish or Princess Problems. But if you'd like something more positive and you're tired of us talking about shitty songs, believe me, I am too. I have a Poor Unfortunate Souls analysis and also a Preminger analysis, which conveniently we talked about those two characters in this video. This has been Calxiyn caring way too much, and I hope now you care too.